Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to get started. So we'll start at about 3 minutes after the hour. But in the meantime, I'm going to throw a poll up there, a little welcome poll for everyone to answer. While we're waiting, we're curious to know how many of you here today have yourself earned a certification or more, and whether you have to maintain it. Let's see. Oh, we already got a few answers. So far, everyone has earned a certification. Nice. Wow, a few certifications that do not require any kind of maintenance. It's not a bad deal. All right, everybody, we'll get started in about 1 minute. So just a little bit more time to answer our little icebreaker poll here. Wow, so far everybody has a certification. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share the results with you guys. So 100% of you in attendance today have one or more certifications. Very impressive crowd. And of that, about 33% do not require any kind of recertification, which is fascinating. And some of them, at least one require certification, and some of them 3 or more. Very interesting. Well, thank you all for indulging me in the entry poll. So once again, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted that you're here with us for our very first live webinar in our Learning and Assessment broadcast series. My name is Sandy Hogg. I'm the business manager at ITS, and I'm going to be your host and moderator today during our session. We are really, really excited today to talk to you about the evolution of recertification and what longitudinal assessment brings to the table. Just to set the stage, today's presentation should last about 45 minutes, and we've saved time for Q&A at the end. So before we dive in, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. We will be saving some, as I mentioned, we'll be saving some dedicated time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but please do submit your questions as you think of them throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. There's a little button at the bottom of your Zoom window where you can submit questions. Using the Q&A feature, you can actually also upvote questions there. So if someone asks something that you're also curious about, feel free to like it, give it an upvote, and I'll kind of dish out the questions at the end based on sort of the most popular questions. So I'll be coming back in at the end and I'll be directing questions to our panelists. There is also a chat function in Zoom. You should see it at the bottom of your window. And, we definitely want to hear from you today. So don't be shy. Feel free to use that chat button to share your thoughts with the panelists directly or with other participants. Just remember to keep it on topic. This webinar will be recorded, so we'll share the link to access that after the webinar has ended. And there will also be a survey at the end. So keep an eye out for that. It should appear in your Zoom window. So just don't click away too quickly. We really love to hear your feedback about today's webinar, as well as suggestions for future topics. We are all ears for that. Okay, so housekeeping's over. One last thing, if you are not familiar with ITS, we are welcome, first of all. Hello, nice to meet you. We are a technology company established 25 years ago with the vision of bringing test delivery online, something that at the time was unheard of. Over the last 25 years, we've been at the forefront of innovation in the industry, working really closely with our partners to develop a suite of software and services that not only support assessment programs, but also help them evolve. Our mission is to drive the assessment industry forward through partnership, technology, and investment. Now, this is a good segue into our discussion today because we're often working with our partners to take a step back and see how the market is evolving and help bridge that gap between the old way of doing things to the new modern way of doing things. And today we'll be looking at recertification through that lens, sharing what we've learned along the way about the old and the new. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our panelists for today, Ryan and Elizabeth. They're going to introduce themselves, and I'll disappear into the background until the very end. So Ryan and Elizabeth, take it away.
Thanks, Sandy.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Pitta. I'm a senior product manager here at ITS, and I've been working with Ryan on our continuous certification solution for the past 3 years, 4 years. It's been a while.
Seems like a while.
It's a journey. And I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you all about it.
And my name is Ryan Howard. I'm the Director of Medical Assessments here at ITS. I've been part of the implementation team with a number of ITS's solutions. And so I'll be bringing those experiences, from that journey into this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to get us started. All right, so our goal today is to discuss, ITS's continuous certification product journey, from inception to where it is today, in the hopes that, even if you aren't using our solution, that you're presented with what we believe is a modern, flexible, reliable approach to recertification. Before we dive into the fun details of how to modernize the approach to recert, I want to spend just a couple of minutes discussing, how recertification examinations have traditionally been structured so that we can better understand the journey to where we are now. I will say that this explanation is coming from the lens of the medical space, since that is where ITS got started with our continuous certification solution. But the solution is relevant, is impactful for all spaces, and we encourage all spaces to ask questions and stay present. Traditionally, after a high stakes initial certification, candidates were required to maintain their certification by completing sometimes up to 3 components, one of which banking continual education credits, or CE, by performing things like trainings or attending webinars, performing activities. Also, annual or biannual quality improvement activities, often by conducting peer reviews of imaging and other procedures. And a high stakes assessment every 5 and sometimes even 10 years, where the candidate has to travel to a testing center and essentially answer the recertification examination again. So I'm going to paint a little picture for you for what this experience feels like. Say I'm a doctor. I was certified, 9-ish years ago. Now I've got my cozy medical practice on the beaches of the Carolinas, and I'm due for my recertification examination. I'm notified that for my recert, I have to travel to Chicago, sit for a 5-hour examination. Not excited about it. Now I've got to take time off work. I have to reschedule my patients. I have to find after school care for my kids. I have to spend thousands of dollars on airfare, accommodations, the test itself. I have to study and prepare for the test after my 10-hour workday and juggling between sports and ballet recitals for the kids. You can really see that these high stakes exams were taxing on both the certifying boards and the candidates, and they really had some major drawbacks. With a point in time assessment, you're really only proving what you know at that time. And based off of feedback, candidates weren't retaining most of the knowledge due to, their cramming for the test. And honestly, forgetting immediately after their recertification and not having to address it again for another 10 years. So a number of years ago in the medical space, they started conducting, research and took it upon themselves to really rethink what recertification should look like. What should remain, what should be new, what should change. In most cases, the CE and the QI activities provided really measurable benefits with little burden on candidates. So in many instances, programs chose to maintain these pieces of research, but revamp what was clearly needed for the assessment piece. So there's really a big recognition that assessment is important to recertification, but each program, has its own idea of how to provide, value to their candidates, further their knowledge, lessen the burden, while still achieving their assessment requirements. Integrating longitudinal assessment into that solution was thought to be a really good way to maintain the assessment requirement, but also to ensure candidate knowledge and growth with a more continuous and less burdensome approach to assessment. So about 5 years ago, we at ITS, we're also thinking about how to, enhance assessment and ways to provide value, not to just candidates, but industries as a whole, so that assessment wasn't just a way to, check a box on a requirement, but it could also be a mechanism for growth and learning. As we at ITS were developing this product, medical boards were coming to us with their own thoughts and ideas of how they wanted to change recertification for their candidates. From the American Board of Surgery with their continuous certification product, where candidates were presented with rationales after answering questions, along with the ability to reattempt incorrect questions after completing, their assessment and reviewing the learning material. To the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners in their Catalyst product, where they integrated learning material and longitudinal assessment into the mix to promote content in more digestible quarterly deliveries instead of the once in 5 year, once in 10 year. And the American Board of Medical Specialties with their CertLink product. They also took a longitudinal approach to recertification, but with adaptive targeted item delivery so that candidates were getting questions relevant to their specialty and adaptive based off of performance. So as you can see, one thing, is really clear. Each board needed something a little bit different. And that's the approach that we took, with developing this continuous certification product. Elizabeth is going to go into greater detail on the foundations and the key features of the product. But it was clear that the system needed to be, mobile capable to accommodate, the on-the-go of the modern world, incorporate opportunities for learning so that candidates can really get a deeper understanding of the content in the assessment, and flexible to be able to support, multiple industries, all of them needing something a little bit different. I am coming from this, with my history of the medical space, but, as I said, this is a product that, we believe, will revolutionize, recertification in not just the medical space, but the IT space and every other space in between. With that, I'll pass it to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Ryan. So like Ryan was saying, this has been a product journey. So when we took a step back, when we had these boards come to us and say, we want to change the way that we're doing recertification. ITS has traditionally done a lot of high stakes certification where candidates are going to a test center, they're doing this point in time exam, things are very secure and highly managed. And this was kind of a bit of a turn for us. So we had to take a step back and actually look at what we were trying to provide. And kind of going along those lines, we did some research and kind of landed on the adult learning theory as a foundation for how we were going to move forward with this new product. So there's a lot of research surrounding the study of adult learning, but the adult learning theory has kind of emerged as one of the top theories studied by scholars. And it looks at adult learning and how that differs from primary learning that you do in primary education in childhood. And so when we started doing our brainstorming, we looked at the adult learning theory and its 5 assumptions for how adults learn. So each one of these assumptions speak to general ways in which adults perceive learning and how they prefer to take in information. The first one is the self concept, which refers to the idea that there is a difference between how children learn in primary education, where they're passive learners who take in information that is taught to them, as opposed to adults who are more in control of the information that they're learning. They seek out different forms of communication and learning, and they really want more control over what they want to learn, when they want to learn it, and how they want to learn it. So they're really seeking that autonomy over their education. The second piece, learning from experience. I'm sure, as most of you know, as you grow, you have many life experiences. So adults really have that wealth of life experiences different than children, and that those experiences can be used to inform and enrich their learning. They've lived life and often had to learn on the job, use real world situations, and whether that's the practical experience of the topic that's being tested, or whether it's bringing a different perspective to new material that's being learned, drawing from that knowledge is a really powerful factor for learning new material and retaining it, because it gives some context to what they're actually learning. The third assumption, the readiness to learn, is the idea that adults learn best when the subject matter is important to them. So the more relevant a topic is to an individual, the more they're willing to invest time and effort into the learning of that subject. The fourth one listed on here is the orientation to learning. And this is an assumption that, depending on the research paper that you're looking at, is sometimes split into two separate assumptions. Just depends on who the author is, but it boils down to two basic points. And the first one is, when learning, adults want to know why they should obtain this knowledge, what makes it useful, what makes it worth their time. And then secondly, they want to know how they can immediately apply this to their lives. So how can this information solve existing problems that they've seen? How will it benefit their life today, tomorrow, next week, next month? It's not the theoretical application of this knowledge sometime in the future. So it's not algebra that you're going to use one day. I've used, algebra so many times in my daily life. It's definitely that more immediate application of that knowledge. So adults will generally gravitate towards learning opportunities that are task-oriented, life-focused, problem-solving centric. The fifth one on here is the motivation to learn, which is similar to the first one, where as children we learn because of external factors such as parents and teachers. However, as adults, we want to learn for our own reasons. So it, for example, could be to progress in work or to boost self-esteem. It's an internal motivation that drives learning and the retention of knowledge, as opposed to an arbitrary means to an end, like passing a class in order to advance to the next level.
Brought me some PTSD by mentioning algebra.
It's so applicable.
It is.
So, yep, there we go. So when we started building our recertification solution, we wanted to take those 5 assumptions of adult learning theory and translate them into some practical features that would make this platform really useful. And since our part of the recertification process is the assessment portion, where we test to make sure all the candidates have the knowledge necessary to be recertified, one of the first key points was to embrace the longitudinal assessment model that Ryan spoke about, where we're delivering a smaller number of questions over a longer period of time, as opposed to all the questions all at once at a point in time. So for us, that meant that we have 2 different time intervals that we look at for the spaced repetition. The smaller period of time in which candidates have to answer a set of questions, we call it a segment. In the larger interval of time over where they're ultimately being assessed over the course of the entire delivery of questions, we call that a cycle. And together, these 2 intervals help to break down learning into immediate opportunities that build into long-time knowledge retention. So we built the system to be configurable for what those time intervals would look like. For some of our clients, a segment is quarterly. The candidate has 10 to 20 questions that they have to answer by the end of a quarter. And then their certification performance is judged over an overall longer period of time. So sometimes, like Ryan mentioned, that's as long as 5, 6, 10 years. And that's to give the candidate time to demonstrate their knowledge acquisition and retention. So we can see the performance from day 1 to year 10 and see any areas of concern or also areas of improvement. So for other clients, though, we also do this for a much shorter period of time. We have some clients that are doing as short as a few weeks for a segment, and then their summative decision about whether the candidate has met the requirements for recertification is also much shorter, sometimes on a yearly basis, where each year the candidate's assessment essentially resets and they have a blank slate to start over again. So it's really down to kind of what makes the most sense for both admins or test creators, as well as the candidates, because the goal of reimagining this recertification is to make it as unburdensome as possible for everyone. One of the next key pieces to the platform was to tie in the orientation of learning concept and give candidates practical resources that are available before doing their assessment, immediately after answering a question during the assessment, and then also have those learning resources available after answering all the questions. And that could be like days and months and years after they've seen the material. And that's to give that candidate many opportunities to go back and study up on an area that they may need to work on or delve deeper into a particular topic. And we really did this to encourage the learning assessment to run in parallel, to encourage the learning to run in parallel with the assessment. We also wanted to make sure that this material could be updated at any time, because as I think we all know, industries and the world changes and evolves every year. And since we have many medical boards as clients, you know, a lot of medical information evolves over time. One of the more interesting things that we've seen over the past 2 to 3 years was how boards use this platform to get information out about probably the most emerging medical topic of the time, COVID, and how to get the information out on COVID best practices. So, as I'm sure you've seen, the protocols regarding COVID care have evolved significantly over the last 3 years. And it gave us a really unique opportunity to look at the learning material and have that be something that could be updated really on like a monthly basis as things evolved and changed. It also gave us the opportunity to create test content around an emerging topic so that it could be inserted into the candidate's recertification journey when it was most relevant, rather than like years later when the topic of COVID hopefully is more stale and not as relevant. So that's been a very interesting factor that we've seen with being able to update those resources at any time.
And I think that's a really good point about, being able to, having the system support immediate updating of, learning resources. Obviously, we wouldn't want to, impact test delivery and update content, throughout, the content's journey, but, disassociating, the learning opportunities, providing journal articles, URLs, study guides, summaries, key learning points, and associating that to the items themselves and being able to publish that, or push it out to test takers, independently of test delivery, I think is a really powerful and like you said, Elizabeth, helpful feature, when things like, an epidemic, occur. Hopefully we will never have to experience that again, but, the world's changing quite quickly. So, having a system that, can adapt to that change, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Next slide. Excellent. So to incorporate the adult learning theory assumptions of self-concept, where the candidates want more autonomy over what and where and how they're learning, and to support also that readiness to learn assumption, where candidates find value in the material that's important to and relevant to them. We really wanted to ensure that the platform was giving candidates that personalized learning approach. So in order to do this, we built out a few key features that we have listed here. And the first is a configurable algorithm that incorporates a lot of data points, including candidate performance and candidate personal feedback on their performance. And we use all of those data points to deliver test contents that is the most relevant to the individual candidate. So like I said, we use an approach that incorporates a lot of different data points, as well as weighting on each one of those data points that can all be configured so that, if a client decided they wanted to deliver more test questions and put the emphasis on ones that were that the candidate got wrong, but they thought that they might have gotten right and they were very confident in their answer, we can put a higher weight on those so that more of those types of questions are selected for future segments of the candidates taking questions. And it also, what that means is if we have a large enough pool of questions for any client, that no two candidates will really ever get the exact same test. And that factors even like specialty certifications or having multiple certifications can be built in so that all of that is taken into account to give a more relevant test question experience. And we've seen that be very useful, especially since we're taking a different approach with the way that we're doing security for these exams, and having two candidates who have maybe even the same credentials and the same specialty certificates won't have the same questions on their form just because of the way that they have answered and their performance in previous questions. So it really is a nice way to build in security just by having the factor that no two tests are the same. So another feature that we built in was to customize the test experience in a way to enforce learning over time through the repetition of ideas, material over the course of the entire cycle. And we have two different mechanisms that we do this with. We developed the product to give clients kind of multiple ways to do this. But the two that I'm going to talk about right now, we do retries or reattempts and clones. And they're very similar in that both take into account the candidate's performance on previous questions. With retries, we present the exact same question to the candidate at a different interval to kind of reinforce the concept of what they're testing over time. And then clones, we present the same concept or area of information, but it is actually a different question, also presented at a different interval. And that's to kind of ensure that the knowledge that they had gained is retained over time. And we use these in conjunction. We have some clients that use both of them. We have some that use one or the other. But it's been very interesting to see the statistics that come about for candidates who see a question, attempt it, get it wrong, and then have one of these other opportunities to either see the same question again or to see a question on the same topic again, and the improvement over time that having that repetition provides. And then finally, the final piece that we wanted to incorporate into the solution was a way for candidates to know exactly where they stand within the recertification process and with their progress and performance at all times. And so to do that, we built in a dynamic dashboard that is configurable by client, and it can show all types of performance indications such as progress within their segment, progress within their entire cycle, the percentage correct in any given topic area, the number of incorrect questions, the number of correct questions. We even have the comparison to their peers or a cut score so that they can see how they're doing in comparison to others that are following the same recertification process, or a cut score where they know I need to achieve 80% to get this recertification. And I'm sitting right now at 85%. So that's great. I'm above the cut score. And we even have a widget to help the candidate plan their assessment strategy. And that we built in to help them organize the time that they're spending per week on their assessment progress. And all of this combines to give the candidates insight into their performance and really help them understand the areas where they may need improvement, or where they're doing very well. And I think I mentioned it before, but we've seen how this data increases the motivation to continue learning and growing, and how performance has improved over time. And that dashboard, we have over 250 metrics that we can configure to kind of display in the various dashboard widgets, and we work with each client when we're bringing them on to make sure that we're giving candidates the right information that's important and relevant to them on their recertification journey.
And it is really interesting to see how, these boards or, clients are using the dashboards. I feel like no one dashboard is the same, or no two dashboards are the same. And, it really gets to, now that we're delivering, questions over an extended period of time, what type of information do you want to convey about progress and performance, to your candidates? Some programs don't want to show, any performance metrics, no correctness, because they want to consume, the data internally, process it, key changes, all of that, kind of stuff, and then, present performance in, a score report. Whereas some, want to show you, like this example we have on the screen here, how are you doing in this particular quarter, in addition to how this quarter is contributing to all the quarters in the past, or showing a cumulative score. So it's been really fascinating to see, how programs are using these dashboards.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. You also reminded me, I skipped over the third point in that first bullet, which is that we also provided a support for candidates designing their own assessments. And this was done within limits. So we're not saying that a candidate can say, I only want questions in this one area and nothing else. Our clients say, all right, these are the parameters, these are the margins that we want our test questions to be delivered within. So, there's these 4 content areas, and within those 4 content areas, between 25 and 40% of the questions could come from any content area. So we designed within the system a way for candidates once a year to go in and play with the percentages, so that if there was an area that's more useful or relevant to their actual practice, that area could be dialed up. Or if there's something that maybe is not as useful in their practice, or something that's just not in their interest, we could dial that down to the minimum percentage. And that goes into the algorithm for test question selection, again, so that it's a very personalized, individualized approach to the test.
All right. So, what did I know we threw a lot of, information out there into the ether. One thing is clear, a modern approach to recertification, needs to be flexible and adaptable. Every program, every board, every IT certification, they don't need or necessarily even want the same thing. So, our product provides that flexibility. And I think it's important, for any product to, be flexible and adaptable to, an ever-changing, industry or, world. When adopting, a recertification solution, or even in your, beginning concepts of it, I think something to take away is, don't get overwhelmed by all of, the options. There's a lot of things you can do. Do you need to do them all? Probably not. So really take some time and think about what you're really trying to achieve, and select features based off of that. Maybe even start small, start with something simple, and you can grow it from there. Each of our implementations of the continuous certification product has been its own unique journey and, all a little bit different from one another. But, now that we're getting the product out there, it's been in use for over 4 years. We finally get a chance to dive into the data to see, how is this changing industries? How is this being perceived? And, the data kind of speaks for itself. Candidates like and appreciate the longitudinal approach to recertification. And they're actually excited to come back and when their questions are available to answer them. Imagine that, someone wanting, to get their next quarter's questions, not just to get it over with, but, to figure out like what concepts are they going to be, improving on or, being introduced to. For example, the now award-winning CertLink product has a 98% user satisfaction rating, which I think is pretty outstanding for any type of assessment. The data also shows that with periodic item delivery, with allowing for learning and assessment to run in parallel, candidates are retaining knowledge. For example, one of our programs saw that 60% of candidates did better on their reattempt after taking advantage of learning content in the platform, answering a question incorrectly, and then using what was provided in the platform, the resources, the rationales, the study guides, etc. And when they were delivered, that retry or clone later on, 60% did better. That's a person that gained a skill that they wouldn't have gained in the traditional approach. So when our professionals, whether they be doctors or software developers, are able to continuously grow their knowledge through assessment and remain up to date with constantly evolving concepts and technology, that's, I can only speak for myself. That's really a world that, I want to be in. And with that, our most important slide, we want to thank you all for attending. And these are our dogs, Elizabeth's dog, Mia, and my dog, Payson.
Thank you so much, Ryan and Elizabeth. You have some very cute dogs, I have to say. They are very, very, very
photogenic.
Yes,
Thank
photogenic
you.
is the word. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. That was just a wealth of information. We are going to switch gears and get into the Q&A portion. We have several questions in the chat, so I'm just going to sort of usher them over to you all, sorting by the most upvotes at any one time. So first of all, we're going to start with a question about, is anyone outside of the medical space using this type of product currently?
Yeah, it's a great question. We did speak a lot about the medical space, and the medical space did kind of revolutionize this type of assessment. They did push this out there to a lot of their candidates, but as of yet, we are actually having conversations with some of our IT partners in releasing this type of platform out to them. We do not have any implementations at the moment, but there are conversations going, and I'm really excited for this type of product to break into the IT space.
And I'll just piggyback on that to say that I think the medical space was one of the first ones to kind of adopt this because they had the need for recertification. And I know not all industries have that. As we saw from the original polls, some people can get a certification and then there's no requirement for the recertification. And I think as it's becoming more widely adopted, I think other industries are seeing the benefit in recertification, both financially and for knowledge retention. Because as we spoke about, things do change. So as more industries kind of move towards the need for recertification, I see more adopting this kind of platform.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, next question. Are you seeing a shift from being forced to learn to self-driven learning?
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say, that's a fun question. So we actually, some boards and clients are taking advantage of this, where Elizabeth brought it up a little bit about, providing candidates the ability to, partially or completely design their own assessment. Where the boards can say, 40% of the assessment is, your core questions. These are required. You have to take these. But then incorporating elective content areas, into the design, where the candidate, whether it's based off of, their subspecialty, specialty, or just, a keen interest, can add questions, for a content area, to their assessment. So actually empowering them to contribute to, what questions they're going to get. Even without that, we're finding that the metrics of, using the rationales, we're tracking every click on any link in the platform when we're providing those URLs for candidates to go out and learn if they choose to do so. They're really utilizing those features, and we're starting to dive into those metrics now. So it's a great question.
And not to bring up the pandemic yet again, but I think it actually provided a huge shift in kind of self-driven learning, because we're seeing a lot more online learning. Everyone had to move online, and that inherently brings in more the need for more self-driven learning. So I think it's only going to increase.
Great. All right. So next up, has there been any research, to your knowledge, on retention rates for summative assessment versus longitudinal assessment? I assume that means, how well you're retaining candidates when they take a summative assessment versus the longitudinal?
Yeah, so some of our partners have shared, this information with us where, one example is a program that, is still, they're still piloting the longitudinal approach, so they're offering both the, summative traditional research exam, or you can do, the longitudinal approach. So they're finding that the candidates that are going into, the longitudinal approach, they really want to stay there. Their scores are higher than the summative. They really want to maintain there, and they're speaking to their peers about it. So we're finding that programs that allow for you to register throughout the year for the longitudinal approach, that you may have start the year with 3,000 candidates, but you're ending the year with 5,500 because people are starting to get the word out and take advantage of this new approach.
Interesting. So that kind of speaks to the retention as well as just to the popularity.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot of anecdotal evidence right now. I think the psychometric analysis is just beginning to happen, because we're kind of coming up on that 10-year mark of this starting to be a thing. So I think we're finally getting some good data. So I would imagine we'll have some data-driven metrics as well soon.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the next year or so. I think you hit the nail on the head, Elizabeth, with, at least you and I, we have been very focused, on, the delivery of the product and making sure that it's, achieving the needs, of our partners of the industry. I can't wait to start diving into, the data to start to, enhance the platform on, data-driven feedback instead of just, like you said, anecdotal.
Well, we look forward to that data as well.
Part 2 of the webinar.
Yes. Tune in later. All right, here's a juicy one. What advice do you all have based on your interactions with other organizations, test sponsors, for an organization that is considering this modern approach to recertification? The question asker says, seems a little overwhelming to go from CE credit, which is continuing education credit, requirements, to a longitudinal assessment platform. What do you have to say?
Does seem overwhelming. I would say from some of our clients who maybe not necessarily went strictly from CE credits to now incorporating an assessment into that, but from the ones that we had that already had an assessment, it was definitely a lot easier. I think, for someone coming from a program where there was no assessment component, it might be a bit more difficult, just because the amount of content that you would have to generate for test questions and perhaps for learning resources and things like that is quite significant. But that being said, a lot of the programs start off with very small numbers of questions per quarter. I mean, even something like 5 questions per quarter. So that's saying, you have to come up with content, 20 questions for a year. It's a little less overwhelming when you can break it down into that smaller bit of information.
Yeah, that seems more manageable for, once it gets up and running, it seems more manageable for the.
Yeah, and there's definitely front load of work.
Mhm.
Generating all that content is a lot of work. And but
Mhm.
once that is in there, and then you're just doing kind of a maintenance of new questions, new topics, new things like that, it actually becomes a lot, almost I don't want to say like a no maintenance, but it's a lot easier to run.
Mhm. That's encouraging. All right, question from Gina. Do you know of any boards that offer CME for their longitudinal assessment? So I guess
That's a
give
that's a great
credit.
yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
question. I don't know off the top of my head. Typically there's a CE requirement and then a longitudinal requirement, but I would not be surprised with what I know in this space that the pure participation in a longitudinal assessment product would you know um achieve those credits or contribute to those credits.
Mhm.
Mhm. Awesome. All right, so here's a question about retakes, it sounds like. Are there any attempt limits on the individual items as far as retakes go? Or can candidates retake failed items after some time? Like, tell us a little bit more about any kind of limitations there.
So one of the key things that we always say about this platform is it's configurable. So we have a lot of configuration that can be done. And one of those for the reattempts, we can put limits on how many times an item is allowed to be reattempted. So if it's something where there's 4 different options and you say you get 4 times before this is no longer reattempted, that might not be the best for psychometricians and their scores. So yeah, we do have limits. You could say it can only be reattempted once. It can be reattempted twice. We also have configuration for when that can be redelivered. So we can say, don't show it for 3 segments so that, there's time before you're shown that same question again.
Great. Sounds like you need a t-shirt that says it's configurable.
We do. We do.
All right. Okay, so comment, this seems powerful. This is a big question, is the need for the original credential still there? Or do you see that going away? So the initial certification,
Oh
what do you
boy.
see in your crystal
That's a
ball?
good question.
It is. Again, it really depends on what your program it wants to do. I feel like it would be a hard sell for many medical programs to eliminate that high stakes initial certification. There's a lot that goes into that, whereas I feel like there would be more flexibility on an IT space where this platform can be the achievement and the maintenance of your certification. So I don't see initial certification going away for everybody, but this would be a very valid and useful way to obtain and retain a certification.
Great. Elizabeth, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think Ryan hit it on the head. I don't think that anything where maybe physical safety is such as the medical boards or maybe some of the on training exams for certain industries would ever switch to this, but I could see for sure IT or some other industries where you need the knowledge but don't necessarily need to demonstrate it in the first place. You just need to have that knowledge all along in order to get the value of that certification. Yeah, I could see that happening. I don't think it's anytime soon, but we could see that.
Right, anything's possible, I guess. Never say never. All right, here's a question. Are these assessments norm or criterion referenced?
Ryan, do you want to take that?
With regards to norms, maybe?
Well, I'm struggling with the term criterion reference, so sorry if I answer this incorrectly, but Elizabeth kind of mentioned before that the platform supports providing a dynamic comparison to others in my group. As other people are answering the same questions as me, I'm being compared against them, getting that, competition out, and, the competitiveness of people. But then we also support more of the static or cut score performance norms, where you could display both of them. You could display one of them, but for these performance metrics, if you know that you must achieve 70%, we can display that throughout the platform at an assessment level, at a content area level, at an item level, saying, the performance requirement is 70%, and here's where you are in, your performance. Like, are you ahead? Are you below? If you're below, where's your risk? What am I at risk of never achieving 70%? Those are the things the platform, is able to share in the dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe,
ahead,
sorry,
Elizabeth.
Sandy. I think maybe the reason we were a little struggling with this is that we actually don't make those decisions for programs. So we're there to capture the data. We're there to display metrics, but it's ultimately the clients that decide what the performance requirement is for the recertification. I think most of the clients that we currently have are doing it based off of a cut score, but that's not to say that you couldn't use a different metric to decide if they've qualified for recertification.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm hearing too is that if there is some kind of a norm based on your industry, right? I don't know, like, sort of the title of norms, but if there was something, you could just load that into the system and it can reference. So
yes.
Great. Okay. So sounds great. A couple more left. Is the time limit set at the item level or at the segment sort of quarter assessment level? Where's the timing coming into play here?
To quote Elizabeth, it's configurable. So the system supports, again, it depends on, what your goal is for the platform, but we do support item level timing, no item timing. Candidates can have unlimited timing. Timing can adapt to ADA accommodations or time factor. We could, double time, unlimited time, time and a half, etc. But then also applying timing at, the assessment level. You have a quarter or you have a month to answer these questions, or perhaps, once you start answering, you might have a quarter to answer the questions, but once you actually start answering, you have, 90 days after that point to complete. So, there's lots of different ways that you could apply timing and scheduling to your assessment. It really just goes to, what are your goals?
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, 2 more questions. First one, does it take a lot of people to generate content for this, such as larger teams? I think we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but is there anything you want to elaborate on, Ryan, Elizabeth?
I'd just say, the industry knows writing good items is time consuming. It's expensive as far as money, resources. So, I was kind of getting at that when I had mentioned, if you're adopting a platform like this, you don't have to start with a 2,000 item pool. We have clients that do have 6,500 items in their dynamic item pool, but then we also have clients that are delivering 10 questions, 15 questions a quarter, and all they can provide us with are those 10 or 15 questions quarterly. That's fine. I think the most important part is you're spending the time to write good material and not getting overwhelmed with, I need to have 3 years worth of questions. You don't need to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other advantage to a platform like this is that it extends the life cycle of an item, and it extends the life cycle of resource content that you've written, because it can be used as a resource for one set of questions, but it doesn't have to be question specific. A topic area, you can have these resources reused, and the items, when it's reached its retirement age and it's no longer appropriate for an exam where you're really trying to test knowledge, it can be recycled into practice exams, things that can also be delivered through this platform.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right, last question of the day. What item types are supported in this platform?
We do see, traditional multiple choice, multiple select. The platform will support any item type that, any of our assessment products will support, from drag and drop to, find and replace, anything. We are finding a growth in article-based questions. So there's still traditional multiple choice or, multiple choice, multiple select items, but they're associated to some sort of URL or resource where, the candidate needs to go out, read this resource, watch this video, and then they have questions associated to it. It's very similar to, like reading passage item types, but instead of the platform itself hosting the reading passage, it's, a medical journal, or, it's a YouTube video on SQL development, or, something like that, that you have to go out, process, and then the system will deliver questions to you based off that.
That's great. And speaking of, you mentioned videos, I assume that for sort of medical type exams, there's probably a high number of images and video content that you see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have we have a media viewer that we've built in specifically for kind of the medical industry, where it's very high resolution. You can go down into detail into CT scans and things like that. But the media player supports a variety of media types.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, that was the last question that we have today. Once again, thank you so much for attending our webinar today. We hope you found it relevant and valuable. Once again, keep an eye out for the post-webinar survey in your browser once the session ends. We really would love to hear your feedback. And, feel free to connect with us on social media to keep the conversation going. And don't hesitate to reach out to us directly via email to share what you'd like to see in a future webinar. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.